The media furor over the David Petraeus scandal cast a harsh light on the man who is, hands down, America's most famous general. It's also sparked questions about the way in which Petraeus courted journalists and how that may have affected his coverage, including the affair that prompted his resignation as CIA director. Joining us now is Tom Ricks, longtime Pentagon correspondent for the Washington Post and Wall Street Journal, and who blogs at foreignpolicy.com. His latest book is The Generals, American Military Command from World War II to Today. Tom, welcome.
Thank you.
Based on this book, The Generals, one of them is Petraeus. You had an earlier book called The Gamble, General Petraeus and the American Military Venture in Iraq. Fair to say, I think, that you're an admirer of David Petraeus?
Yeah, and I remain so.
And what's it like to deal with him? He's known to be very adept at working the press.
And that was a good thing, I think, in terms of generalship. He understood, as many Army generals don't, that you need to use the media to get your views out, that it's a responsibility of a general to explain to the American people what you're doing with their money and their children in some war overseas. And so he engaged and he used that megaphone to explain, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm trying to do.
It's an interesting verb, use the media. Mm-hmm. Some would see that as manipulating the media.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think he did, and I think he did it well. But it is part of the job of a good general. I think Dwight Eisenhower did it in World War II. He became the face of the war, kind of explaining it to people. Routinely holding press conferences, talking to reporters.
And how much did that courtship and those relationships and the emails that he exchanged with journalists and all of that, has that contributed to more sympathetic coverage, given his problem with the affair with Paula Broadwell and the resignation at CIA, than he might have gotten otherwise?
No, I don't think so. Actually, I think the media has been in full shark bite frenzy, without regard, really. If anything, I find the real scandal here, or one of the scandals here, is how much the media has turned on Petraeus. Here's a guy who has 4 combat tours in recent years. That's more combat time than any American general had in World War II, who has a smashed pelvis from a parachuting accident, who has a bullet wound through the chest from a training accident. He and his family, and I include his wife, Holly Petraeus, in that, have given enormously in the last 10 years. Yet, when when this scandal broke, we as a country were not as generous with him as his family had been with the country.
You seem to be suggesting that journalists are biting the hand that fed them, that they were perfectly happy to have good relations with General Petraeus when he was on top. Suddenly this scandal happens, fall from grace, huge tabloid-style scandal, and you're saying the press has turned on him. Because I've seen a lot of, particularly people like you who know the guy, seems to me the tone has been more sympathetic, a tragedy for his family, as opposed to the junkyard dog approach.
It's a matter that should have remained private, first of all. This was not a criminal act. There's no allegation that he's committed a crime here, as far as I know. Now, it could always change. More information could come out. But here, he was in a relationship with a consenting adult who was not in his chain of command. He's hardly, I think, probably the first CIA director to have had an affair. This begins with another scandal, which is the FBI investigating a lover's quarrel, I think an abuse of taxpayer dollars.
You say Petraeus should not have resigned.
No, I don't think he should have necessarily.
But once it became public, he felt he had no choice.
Well, it became public because he resigned. I think President Obama could have handled this by saying, you know, Dave, you screwed up big time here. You need to make amends to your wife, and your punishment is you're going back to work. It could have been kept quiet, and then if it ever leaked out, the president could have said, look, this was a private matter involving a misjudgment by Petraeus. He's dealt with it, and I'm confident that national security hasn't been harmed.
And you would have that view if this was some former 4-star who you'd never dealt with?
I'd have that view, I think, of any public official who has given great service to the country. I just don't understand the frenzy of going after this guy. There is no allegation of crime. It's even worse with John Allen, this Marine general, who sends a bunch of emails to a woman, and suddenly he's engulfed in this scandal. I mean, newsflash here, number 1, Dave Petraeus is a human being. Newsflash number 2 here, Marine officer flirts with woman. I mean, I think the standards of journalism are getting pretty low here for using the word scandal. You want a scandal? Scandal is mediocre leadership in Iraq for several years and nobody asking a question in Congress about it. A scandal is John Allen, a fine general, being dragged into this mess and people thinking it's part of a scandal. A scandal is FBI looking into lovers' quarrels. A scandal in Afghanistan is 11 commanders in 11 years.
As you write in your book.
No way to run a war.
So you believe that the media's priorities are completely screwed up in the sense that the serious questions about running a war and people's careers devoted to the military have been subsumed, overshadowed, blown off the screen, so to speak, in favor of a focus on sex, on scandal, and well, let's face it. I mean, CIA director resigns under these circumstances. The general is running the war in Afghanistan. His nomination to be the top NATO commander is put on hold under these circumstances. I mean, it's hard not to cover the story, but you think that we are scandal obsessed in this business?
Yes. I was thinking earlier this week that I'm glad I'm no longer in the Washington Post because I would have been under pressure to cover this. I would have had to cover this.
Sure.
And I would have been really conflicted because I think it is an immoral misallocation of priorities. We as a nation seem to care more about the sex lives of our generals than the real lives of our soldiers. I actually printed out something before I came over here today. It's a great trivia question. Excuse me, in my service I need to use glasses. Who is Sergeant Channing B. Hicks? Who is Specialist Joseph Richardson? The answer is there were two soldiers who died last Friday in Afghanistan. Everybody in the country knows Paula Broadwell's name. Nobody knows those names. Nobody knows soldiers are still dying in Afghanistan.
In addition to Petraeus, just briefly, you think the media coverage has been unfair to Paula Broadwell, to Jill Kelly, as they have become at the center of this media storm?
Yeah, we've just set these people on fire, basically. And these were consenting adults engaged in private acts. I mean, the lack of decency, I think, is kind of appalling to me. I mean, also, the consequences of what's happened to these people. We don't have so many good leaders that we could throw them away casually. General Petraeus stood out over the last 10 years as notably more effective than most of his peers. The message we have sent here is you can be a mediocre general as long as you keep your pants on.
You're not proud of your profession at this point?
No, I'm embarrassed for the profession. I really am. I'm worried for the country that we don't talk about our wars until there's some sort of titillating scandal.
Well, this would be Exhibit A for that view. Tom Ricks, thanks very much for stopping by. Appreciate it. After the break, are the media playing an incendiary role when it comes to racially charged stories? We'll talk to an author who says yes. Eric Deggans in a moment.